Good afternoon. National Assembly for Wales is now in session, and the first item this afternoon are questions to the First Minister. Question 1 is withdrawn. Question 2, Eleni Parrott.
Diolch Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on the Putting Things Right complaints procedure used in Welsh health boards?
Well, Putting Things Right was introduced in 2011, providing robust arrangements for investigating and learning lessons from concerns and complaints. In July of last year, an independent review concluded it's the right approach, and considerable work is underway both locally and nationally to implement the recommendations.
Thank you, First Minister. I understand that that review identified responsiveness as one of the challenges from health boards. And I'm dealing with a number of cases at the moment where the health boards and indeed the ambulance trust have been very slow to respond to patients and families. For those coming to terms with the death of a loved one, perhaps particularly, those delays are simply agonising. They often feel that they need answers before they can properly grieve. Yet I'm dealing, as I say, with cases where we have seen some cases dragging on for perhaps 2.5 years since the death of an individual without any resolution being brought. Can I ask you for an update on how the reviews, the implementation of those recommendations is going with regards to the timeliness of responses from those boards?
It's difficult, of course, to give a view on each and every situation because some will be more complicated than others. We expect, of course, local health boards to resolve complaints as quickly as is possible. There may be occasions, of course, where a health board will need to take longer than 30 days to respond. But nevertheless, it is important, of course, that people are able to get satisfaction from the complaints process as quickly as is possible, bearing in mind there may be some occasions where more complex investigations may be needed.
Darren Miller.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, when Keith Evans undertook his review, there was quite wide variation against the number of responses that were being addressed within 30 days by health boards, ranging from 33% to 82% of complaints in individual health boards. The current figures for the Betsy Cadwallader University Health Board are just that 21% are being resolved within 30 days, and worse than that, greater number than 50%, fewer than half, are actually being addressed within a 6-month period. Now, clearly that is unacceptable. What action are you taking to hold the feet of health boards to the fire to ensure that, as a Welsh Government, your policy is actually being fully implemented by health boards?
Well, first of all, as I mentioned in the initial answer I gave, the recommendations of the report are being implemented. I can say that where a response cannot be issued within 30 working days, NHS organisations must inform a person who's raised a concern the reason for that delay. We expect, of course, local health boards to ensure that they implement the recommendations, and that is something that they are in the process of doing.
Roger Thomas.
Prif Weinidog.
First Minister, are you entirely convinced, you say that these recommendations are being implemented, but are you entirely convinced that health boards are enthusiastic in implementing these recommendations? Or do you agree with some of my constituents who feel that there has been a necessary delay in the hope that the complainants will decide not to progress with their complaints?
It's difficult, once again, to give a view about the situation of any individual, but I know that this is a very important issue for the Health Minister because we wish to ensure that complainants have the opportunity to get those complaints resolved as soon as possible.
Question 3, Nick Ramsey.
Will the First Minister provide an update on plans for improving the Welsh NHS?
Yes, we invested an additional £295 million in 2015 to 16 for the NHS in Wales to deliver high-quality, sustainable services.
First Minister, what steps are you taking to improve access to cancer treatments in Wales? You'll be aware of my constituent, Anne Wilkinson, who's been unable to access Avastin despite it being available a few short miles across the border from her home in England. This really isn't good enough at the moment, is it, First Minister? Now, no one is saying that that list of cancer treatments shouldn't change with time and be amended as evidence comes forward, but it really would be helpful if we had a list in Wales to start with, wouldn't it? When are you going to take action and give people in Wales the cancer treatment they need?
First of all, of course, the Cancer Drugs Fund in England is being curtailed in the sense that there are drugs being removed from that list because, as we know, it's overrun in terms of its budget. There is good news from it in the sense that now, of course, pharmaceutical companies are having to come back with a better price. The problem with the Council Drugs Fund, one of the difficulties is that basically it pays whatever the drug companies ask. There's no negotiation, no bargaining, no value for money as far as the public are concerned. That is now beginning to happen as a result of the curtailment of part of the fund in England. But we take the view that it's important that people have access to effective drugs as quickly as possible, and that's why, of course, in Wales, approved drugs are more accessible than in England when it comes to cancer.
Lindsay Whittle.
Thank you, Llywydd. Minister, are you satisfied that all of the money spent on public and personal health promotion and plans is cost-effective and is proving to be useful? And are you satisfied that all of the campaigns currently underway or being considered are worth it for their outcomes?
Yes.
We now move to questions from the party leaders. And first this afternoon, we have the Leader of the Opposition, Andrew Archie-Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, last Thursday, through great fanfare and announcement in the press, but sadly not a statement in this institution, your government brought forward proposals for apprenticeships in West Wales and the Valleys, £141 million, something I welcome. I mean, anything that offers people opportunities in some of our most socially challenged areas has to be welcomed. But how can you make the scheme that you've brought forward actually benefit the people in those communities? Because if you go back to 2000 and 2007, similar schemes were brought forward, yet economic activity wasn't forthcoming.
Well, we know, of course, the experience of Jobs Growth Wales and the experience we've had with funding apprenticeships, that there is demand for more apprenticeships, and that's why we are pleased, of course, to be able to announce these apprenticeships, and the figure, of course, compares very favourably with the announcement that's been made by the current UK government.
First Minister, you can go through reams of information on schemes that were brought forward in the Objective 1 era, in convergence funding, and now obviously we've attracted the third round, or your government has managed to attract the third round of funding, which on the surface sounds good, but equally, when you look at it, it's because economically we have not performed. And what we want to know is, with this announcement, are you really going to make the gains that those communities desperately require economically, so that we won't, as a country, have to be applying for a fourth tranche of money because economically the policies you've brought forward have failed?
Well, on a day where we see growth in the UK economy slowing to one of its lowest levels for years, under the stewardship, of course, of the Conservative Party, that's perhaps an unfortunate question. I'll be charitable. I do welcome his welcome, of course, for the scheme. We know that the more skills people have, the more employable they are, and of course another outcome of this scheme is that more money will be made available to further education colleges who will be able to deliver those apprenticeships.
Sadly, we all know the record of your government's apprenticeship schemes. Last year, you withdrew funding, and so 9,000 apprenticeship places were lost, First Minister. You could have used some of the answers that I sought to seek from you to try and set some goals where we might be at the end of this funding window. As I said, there's reams of information here on previous tranches of Objective 1 convergence funding money that has gone in to create apprenticeship, gone in to try and create economic activity, and regrettably, they have failed. You've let those communities down in West Wales and the Valleys. Can you use the third opportunity to respond to me by saying where you believe economically those communities will be, and what goals, tangible goals, are you setting that we can actually see real progress and we're not in the situation of trying to attract the fourth round of funding?
Well, we know the GDP per head has increased. We know the GDHI per head has increased. We see the development in many communities such as Swansea. We see the enterprise zones being developed in West Wales and the Valleys from Anglesey down to Pembrokeshire. And we see the jobs that have been attracted as a result. We take the view that people need the skills in order to allow the Welsh economy to prosper. And, of course, we have done a bit as a government, having the best figures for foreign direct investment than for 30 years. And that is a sign that we are proactive as a government. We invest in our apprentices, we invest in jobs in Wales, but we need, of course, to make sure that we have a UK government that takes a similar view.
We now move to Leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats, Kirsty Williams.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, what assessment and scenario planning has your government carried out with regards to the impact on schools funding following the Westminster election?
I don't know the result, so it's very difficult to predict what the outcome might be.
You'll be aware, though, First Minister, that I and my party here in this chamber have always made schools funding a priority when discussing budget agreements with yourself, and it's also a priority for my colleagues in London. What impact did you think a commitment to protect pupil funding from nursery to 19 in England would mean in real terms for your Welsh Government?
Well, of course, as a government that has protected school spending, despite the cuts that we've had over the last 5 years, and of course, having worked with the Members' Party when it comes to the pupil deprivation grant, I think we share a commitment to education. It's very difficult, of course, to offer a view on what she's just said for two reasons. Nobody knows what the outcome will be on the 7th of May. And secondly, of course, we don't know what commitments that are made in England would lead to any consequentials for Wales.
Perhaps I can assist you with the latter, First Minister. The commitment that my party has made during the Westminster elections would put in extra funding equivalent to 5.2 billion more funding than the Conservatives and 2.5 billion more funding than Labour. That would result in up to £150 million of an additional funding and consequentials for Wales. But what I would like to know, Minister, is will you commit that should that money be available, it will go directly into the education budgets in Wales too?
That will be a substantial amount of money, and we are committed to education, and we want to see education thrive in Wales. As I say, what we don't know is whether 150 million will come with one hand but be taken away with the other. That's what we've seen, of course, over the last 5 years, but I look forward to continuing these potential coalition negotiations in another place.
Move to Leader of Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood.
Diolch, Llywyd. First Minister, I'm sure you were as moved as I was to see the news of almost 2,000 refugees lose their lives recently attempting to cross the Mediterranean. Now, Wales has a proud tradition of providing sanctuary to refugees, and I pay particular tribute to the current Minister for the Economy, who intervened and took a stand against the imprisonment of asylum seekers here in Cardiff Prison back in 2003. Despite this being a reserved matter, have you had an opportunity to express the views of your government with your counterparts in Westminster?
Well, I can say that we are all appalled by what we've seen in the Mediterranean. Sometimes people take the view that it's an easy thing for people to leave their country of birth, cross the sea in an unseaworthy craft to a very uncertain future. You and I both know that that isn't the case. It's absolutely crucial that where people are in difficulty, they receive the help that they need when they're at sea. And of course, we should continue the proud tradition that we have in the UK of offering asylum to those who are in need of it.
Thank you for your answer, First Minister. As you know, the UK Government has two primary schemes for refugees. One is called the Gateway Scheme and the other is called the Mandate Scheme. Now, whilst the Gateway Scheme has a set quota for the settlement of refugees in the UK, there is concern that the quota is not being filled. With the current crisis in the Mediterranean, would the Welsh Government consider seeking a specific Welsh quota as part of the UK quota, so that Wales can play its part in providing sanctuary for those people who are fleeing violence and danger from countries like Syria and Libya?
It's an interesting suggestion. What we do know, though, of course, is that people tend to congregate in areas where there are people of a like background. It's human nature to do that. But certainly from our point of view, we are more than ready to play our part in offering asylum to those people who need it, building, of course, on the tradition that we have. I'm often fond of saying, and I'll say it in this chamber, that we are all in this chamber and indeed on this island the descendants of immigrants. It's simply a question of when our families originally arrived.
Thank you, First Minister. Now, despite the fact that this is reserved, as I've initially said, there is merit, I think, in seeking a multinational approach to the refugee crisis within the United Kingdom. Would you agree with me, therefore, First Minister, if cross-party support could be secured for Wales to become a nation of sanctuary for refugees, that might aid securing that multinational, multi-governmental approach to this humanitarian crisis? And so would you support a joint declaration with other parties in this chamber to that end?
Well, it is a matter that we have been discussing in the Faith Communities Forum, the issue of a nation of sanctuary. It's something that has been raised by a number of representatives there, and it is something I have great sympathy for. I think it's important to give a message that we are a welcoming and open society for those who are most in need, regardless of where they are from in the world. Of course, what we look to do now is to build on the work that's been done by organisations such as the Welsh Refugee Council, such as the Faith Communities Forum, and I would be more than happy, of course, to look to see how we can develop this process in Wales, and of course to seek the support of other parties.
We now move back to questions on the paper, and question 4 is Mike Hedges.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the operation of the Blue Badge scheme?
Yes, there will be an oral statement on that scheme later this afternoon.
Thank you, First Minister. It wasn't on the agenda when I put that question forward, unfortunately. Can I just say that a lot of my constituents have asked me to raise this specifically with you. The work in the Blue Badge scheme has caused a substantial amount of upset and worry to a large number of frail elderly people in Swansea. The toolkit currently being operated seems to work against the frail, the elderly and the infirm who desperately need a blue badge. Can I ask, and I'm sure I know the answer is going to be, will a new toolkit for blue badge assessment be issued in the near future so that we can get away from what's happening at the moment where people who are desperately in need of it are being turned down daily?
Well, the member raises an important issue. Of course, it's something I'm sure that many members in this chamber have received in their postbag and by email, and that's why, of course, the Minister is making a full statement this afternoon, which I hope the member will find is a satisfactory way forward.
Mohammed Ashgar.
Officer, First Minister, the point system designed to help Council assess an applicant's need for blue badge is heavily weighed in favour of those in receipt of disability benefits. Some medical conditions manifest themselves in a way that the sufferer may not even have thought of applying for disability benefits or may not have done so through pride. Could the toolkit be adjusted so that receipt of benefit is not the only realistic criteria to successful application for a blue badge?
Of course, as disability benefit becomes ever harder to obtain, we have to ensure that the blue badge scheme doesn't have unintended consequences, and that's why, of course, the Minister is making the statement.
Peter Black.
Thank you, Signing Officer. I think this has been preempted a bit by the Minister's statement, but do you share my concern, First Minister, that both Neath Betowys and Swansea have effectively opted out of using the Welsh Government's toolkit, making their process less transparent and harder to appeal? And can I ask whether that will be included in the remit of the review? No doubt I'll ask the Minister that later on, but yeah.
I'm sure the Minister will provide you the full answer.
Question 5, Sandy Mewis.
Thank you. First Minister, will you provide an update on what the Welsh Government is doing to increase the supply of housing in Wales?
Yes, we've put in place a number of measures to increase housing supply, including Help to Buy Wales, the social housing grant programme, reforming the planning system and the new housing finance grant. And the latest statistics show that annual completions during 2013 to 2014 were the highest for 4 years.
Thank you for that. In my constituency, Flintshire County Council, as you know, will begin building council housings for the first time in 24 years. The hundreds of houses which will be provided are desperately needed at a time when many families and individuals struggle to get a decent home which is in good condition. Across the border, the Tories are planning to once again devastate social housing stocks by selling them off cheap. So what is the Welsh Government doing to secure the stock of social houses in Wales and incentivise councils to continue to build more homes?
Municipal provision is an important part of housing provision in Wales. We know that over the past 30 years, a substantial amount of public housing has been lost and not replaced. Powys, for example, has lost something like half of its housing stock in that time. Now, we are, of course, ensuring that that gap is filled. It will take some time because it's a gap that built up over many, many years. But what we cannot do is to have a similar proposal in Wales as has been proposed by the Conservatives in England, because that would mean that gap would never be filled. A one-for-one replacement basis is not going to work in terms of filling the gap in public housing that has emerged since the end of the 1970s.
Mark Isherwood.
Thank you. Well, of course, England's been building council houses because of the exemption of the housing revenue account that Wales has only just caught up with. But when the Welsh Conservatives announced no stamp duty on properties under £250,000 in Wales, you criticised that. When we previously referred questions over rent controls, your housing minister said that rent controls reduce the incentive for landlords to invest and can then lead to reduction in quality housing. I think that could give possible unintended consequences to the supply of private rented properties. Given Mr Miliband's announcements on both those matters at UK level for England, what are your policies now in Wales, given the statements by your government previously?
This is a devolved government. We take decisions that are appropriate for Wales, and what is appropriate for Wales is not a situation where there's a substantial amount of loss of public housing. We know that would be the case if English policies were applied here. And, of course, we are fully aware of what our party says in England, unlike, of course, your own party leader who hasn't actually read his own manifesto.
Question 6, Roger Glenn Thomas.
Will the First Minister make a statement on further education in Carmarthenshire?
Further education in Carmarthenshire is delivered as a joint venture between the college, Coleg Sir Gar, and the local authority, who have a very good, close working relationship.
Well, it's possible that there is a very close working relationship between Coleg Sir Gar and the local authority, but I'm not certain whether there's such a good relationship in existence between Welsh Government and Coleg Sir Gar, because the college, the students and the lecturers and the students' families feel that the impact of the cuts on the education budget has had a very detrimental effect on the provision. Courses are being closed down, students are being refused and on courses, and people are being made redundant. Is that the kind of vision you have for FE in Wales?
Well, two things. It's difficult for all colleges in Wales. We understand that, but we can't spend what we don't have. We've seen the cuts that have come down from London. That's 10%. Therefore, the funding isn't available in the way we would have hoped. We hope that things will change over the next few weeks, of course. And secondly, of course, according to the statement made last week on apprenticeship, there is now an opportunity for colleges to secure further funding for the future as a result of that programme.
Well,
thank you, Presiding Officer. Well, like Roderick Lynn Thomas, I've had a number of complaints about the situation at Coleg Sir Gar, but what's the latest on the work of the working group formed by the Minister to alleviate the impact of these cuts?
That working party is still meeting, but it has to be said that it's very difficult for colleges. We understand that, and we understand that it is very difficult in many areas of the public sector because of the financial settlement that we've received. What we must ensure is that we want to see things changing for the better over the next year.
John Griffiths.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the metro system for transport in South Wales?
Yes, the Minister recently published an updated report setting out progress to date on the metro. The future of the franchise, the Wales and Borders franchise, that is a key element in its delivery, and members will be updated on the progress of both before the summer recess.
First Minister, the metro proposals, I believe, are a transformative big idea for Wales and South Wales in particular. They have a lot of support, I believe, across parties from a range of organisations and amongst the public. And I hear what you say about updates due, First Minister, but would you agree with me that we do need fresh impetus for the metro, which has been discussed for some time, and particularly, I think, more detail in terms of the component parts, the routes, the infrastructure, the structure and body to take the ideas forward, as well as the vision behind these proposals? And would you, with me, look forward to that detail being made available in short order?
Yes, I mean, what I can say to the member is this is a game-changing project and it cannot be done in a half-hearted way, and it's got to be done properly. We understand that. I have had a number of meetings with the Minister and with officials on this, including one yesterday, to look at the progress and how we move forward. A number of issues to address, of course. The issue of what kind of body runs the system, what kind of system it is, what kind, if it's electric traction, of course, that's something, of course, that we want to see. Light versus heavy rail, what the potential new routes are, and of course the rollout of the project in terms of which lines do you look at first, and of course how you ensure that as that rollout happens that those who are waiting for rollout don't see ever older diesel locomotives on the line. So there are a number of issues that are being looked at the moment, but I can give the member the assurance that we fully understand this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that could transform the economic prospects of up to 1 million people in Wales.
Aaron Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, last week you assured the Chamber that you were moving forward with plans for the Metro, but with no detail or timescale. Now, I've heard the answer that you've given already to this. So can I ask you then to tell the Chamber to when you expect to outline more detail, and indeed, can you outline what discussions you've had with transport operators within South Wales regarding the planned metro, as the operators I've discussed the plans with, frankly, have outlined some confusion and lack of communication with government?
No, not in the slightest. There's been full communication with operators. For example, one of the issues that has to be resolved on the Rhymney Valley line, as one example, is the issue of the freight pathways on the line and how that works so that continues even as the line is adapted. There's also a mineral pathway that goes down from Hirwaun. Those are matters that have been discussed. So all the operators know what the issues are. And what we are looking at is how we deal with the franchise issue in terms of heavy rail, in particular whether we go for EMUs or light rail. These are important decisions in terms of achieving value for money, better speeds, better comfort, better trains, and ultimately, of course, ease of extension of the system in the future.
Simon Thomas.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As you say, First Minister, the franchise is crucially important for some of these issues. We have to have a body that will borrow significant funds against the income flow coming from the metro. Now, as we're currently unsure about the future of the franchise for Wales and the Borders, what discussions and what options are you looking at in terms of the way in which the significant financial borrowing will be distributed against this government's books and the Westminster government's books? Has there been any progress in that regard?
Well, a number of options are being considered at present. Firstly, of course, financially, and secondly, as regards the nature of the organisation that will run the system itself. And so a number of things are being considered at present, and as I said, the Minister will give you greater detail before the end of this term, but a number of issues are being considered as regards the system itself and the way in which the system will be funded and run.
Question 8, Anne Jones.
Thank you. Will the First Minister make a statement on obstetrics and gynaecology services at Ysbyty Glan Clwyd, please?
Well, I expect Betsy Cadwallader, the University Health Board, to take any necessary action to provide obstetrics and gynaecology services that are safe, sustainable and meet national clinical standards.
Thank you for that, First Minister. And can I say thank you for all your assistance during the issues around obstetrics and consultant-led maternity services. Can I ask you what your government can do, though, to ensure that Health Board, in particular Betsy, but other health boards, don't have plans that will widen health inequalities in certain communities, such as those with some of my areas? I do think it's important that people feel that if there is a health inequality there, that it isn't widened, and we should be doing all we can to provide a service that is truly equal and fair for everybody.
I entirely agree with what the member has said. It is not our intention to widen health inequalities in any part of Wales. Indeed, exactly the opposite, and we would expect local health boards in any decisions that they take to ensure that health inequalities are not widened. Indeed, the health inequalities are reduced.
Darren Miller.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, you'll be aware from personal experience in North Wales on the doorsteps over the past few weeks just what public outrage there is about the Health Board's plans, and many people in North Wales are urging you and your government to intervene in the situation in order to maintain services at Glan Clwyd Hospital. What is your response to them? Will you intervene, and will you secure the future of those services in Bodlwyddan?
Well, of course, as the member knows, this is now a matter of judicial review in the courts. And so there is a limit on what I can say. The proposed decisions of the local health board will now be tested in that forum, and we wait, of course, the outcome of that.
Hugh Griffith.
But isn't it the case that there are two judicial reviews ongoing at present, and isn't that cause of concern and even more of a reason for you to step in as a government to deal with the situation? Because we have seen now, and you mentioned in your initial response to the member for the Vale of Clwyd, that we need safe clinical services, but the clinicians themselves, the BMA, now support judicial review. Surely that would lead you to review the situation.
Not every profession has supported the BMA's stance, I can tell you that, but that is the view of the BMA. It's now up to the courts to consider the case itself and, of course, to come to a decision.
Robert?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. You've referred to the two judicial reviews. Now, when they were announced initially, the Health Board said that they weren't going to implement their plans until the outcome of the review was announced. Now, yesterday, a statement was made by the Health Board stating that they will proceed in making a decision on the recommendations on the 15th of May and that they will be implemented from the 19th of May. Are you content with the fact that the Health Board now appears to be proceeding with its plans?
I wouldn't say that it was sensible for any health authority to proceed with changes when a judicial review is pending. So it's extremely important that there is a result on that so that everybody knows what the view of the courts and the next steps should be.
Question 9, Jenny Rathbone.
First Minister, what is the government's strategy for the local production and consumption of renewable energy?
Well, these matters are key components of Energy Wales, which sets out our approach to making the transition to a low-carbon energy system. Last year, we published the Energy Wales Delivery Plan and the baseline study of renewable energy to show the actions we're taking and progress that has been demonstrated so far.
Some of the lessons that was learnt by the Environment Committee on its visit to Germany indicates that one of the things that's needed is a stable feed-in tariff and the right of communities to both sell as well as produce their own energy, so that has led to a blossoming of renewable production and a solid source of income for many isolated communities. What discussions will you have with the incoming, hopefully Labour government, about breaking the monopoly role of the national grid so communities can own and sell their own renewable energy, and also to ensure that there's some stability to the feed-in tariff, which was torn up by the greenwash Tories?
Well, the greatest problem that any potential energy supplier faces is what price they're going to be paid. And that is a major break on investment. Until they know what the strike price is going to be, they won't make the investment for obvious reasons, because they can't make the figures stack up. So any kind of stability and certainty in the system is very much to be welcome. In terms of Wales, I know that the Minister has identified in her energy statement that there is an urgent need to address electricity grid matters in Wales. Failure to do so, we know, will severely impede our energy ambitions. And we know that in some parts of Wales, the lack of capacity in the grid makes it difficult to attract investment because, of course, the electricity can't be provided as part of the problem. We know it's true of the more rural parts of Wales, and that is something that we expect should be resolved in the future. Difficulty is, of course, if you strengthen the grid, quite often it means bigger pylons, and we know that leads to other issues.
Russell George.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Minister, you have previously stated that your government would not support, of course, pylons, large pylons in mid-Wales. So I would be grateful if you could update me on the most recent discussions you've had with National Grid on the Mid-Wales Connection project.
Well, of course, the matter now has been wrapped up by DEC, and so it's part of an inquiry. It is right to say, though, on the member's own constituency, that the grid is fragile. We know that. We know that it would be very difficult to attract an investor into his constituency that was a high energy user, because the grid isn't strong enough to supply their needs. It's a difficult balance, we know that, because we know, as he will know himself, that where there is a proposal to strengthen the grid, there are inevitably people who will object to the size of the pylons. From our point of view, with regard to the matter he's referred to, it was taken from our hands by Whitehall, and in Whitehall's hands it remains.
Claire Griffith.
Thank you. Of course, we did visit Germany as an Environment Committee recently to look at these projects, and in Germany the communities themselves bring forward sites for wind farms, for example. It's the communities themselves that develop the projects and also retain the profits. In this country, of course, we have a government which puts TAN 8 in place and says where they will go, and have the Big Six coming in and actually erecting the turbines and taking the energy and the profits. What's your government doing to put that right?
I don't believe that it's true that there's no regulation in Germany about where the turbines go, but may I say about TAN 8? There is no kind of prohibition on having windmills outside the TAN 8 areas, but it is possible to demonstrate that it's possible, that there is a benefit to the wind energy outside TAN 8, and it could be considered. What TAN 8 endeavoured to do was see where the major applications would actually be located, and then to try and regulate that to ensure that there's no overdevelopment. It's still possible for people to bring smaller projects forward in areas out with the TAN 8 areas so that local authorities may consider them.
First Minister, one of the 5 green laws that my party is currently proposing would be specifically to extend the remit of the Green Investment Bank so as to enable investment in small-scale community renewable schemes and also to increase the potential for investment in research and development of emerging technologies. Do you agree with me that this would provide a useful boost to the potential development of community energy in Wales and also lead to community energy schemes taking a higher profile in this country?
If it brings more money to Wales, I will support it. But of course, Anir Fro has taken the lead in terms of being able to encourage people to take forward small projects. 58 projects are being supported through that scheme. And we know that there will need to be a greater mix of energy generation in the future, from the very large generators, which are needed because of our industrial base, through to smaller community-based schemes that can provide benefits not just for communities where those schemes are placed, but of course generally in terms of reducing carbon emissions.
Question 10, Simon Thomas.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the future of Jobs Growth Wales?
Well, our target, of course, is to deliver 16,000 job opportunities over 4 years. By the end of last March, we will have exceeded that target by some margin.
Thank you, First Minister. I noted that wasn't a statement on the future of the programme. In last year's budget, you pledged 12.5 million for 2 years, stating that extending the programme for this financial year would also take place. Now, in the budget for this financial year, there is a cut of 25% down from 12.5 million to 9.3 million. Would it therefore be fair for people to conclude that the current delays in the programme are because you actually cut the budget?
No, there will be a statement next month as regards a new scheme, which will be the new Jobs Growth Wales, and we will ensure that that's in place as soon as possible.
Diolch, First Minister. Jobs Growth Wales, of course, has brought enormous benefits for young people and businesses in Wales. Over 17,000 jobs have been created so far, of which 1,200 have been filled in the Caerphilly County Borough alone. It's testament as well to the value of European Union membership for Wales. Do you agree with me, First Minister, that the false suggestion that has appeared in the media that Jobs Growth Wales is being scrapped or shelved is both reckless and misleading? Jobs Growth Wales is the most successful scheme of its type in Europe, and the new scheme will continue to bring benefits for young people and the Welsh economy overall.
It is one of the most successful schemes, if not the most successful scheme in Europe. We know that 15,000 young people have started work through the programme. That's testimony to how successful it has been, and we look forward to putting in place a successor scheme from next month.
William Graham.
First Minister, you'll know that you put out in a statistical release in March that the scheme was going to come to an end. It wasn't noted very much by the press, but could you undertake today to say that no student has been disadvantaged by the fact there's been this gap? We still don't know what you're proposing in the future.
No, because those already on the scheme will continue. There'll be a new scheme in place, and there'll be an announcement on that next month. And we look forward to continuing with a scheme that, in many ways, replaced a scheme that his own party removed, namely the Future Jobs Fund. We have done our bit for young people, and we have done more than our bit in terms of replacing the gap that was left by his own party.
Question 11, Mark Isherwood.
Thank you. What plans does the Welsh Government have to improve the transparency of information provided in response to freedom of information requests?
We already ensure that by complying with the Act.
Thank you. Well, when I questioned you on the 3rd of February, after the Welsh Government had, for a second time, lost at the Information Rights Tribunal in the Llangollen River Lodge case, over refusal to provide information, you responded by dismissing evidence-based allegations and saying that of the requests the Welsh Government receives, only 0.29% end up with information being released. How do you respond to the official Welsh Government statistics, the latest published for 2013, that in fact say 60.9% of completed requests are released? Out of 1,099 requests, completed out of 1,102 received?
No, he misunderstands the point I was making. No, he is trying to say, he's using a figure for information released as a result of FI requests. That's true. The figure that he is trying to misuse is the figure in relation to the amount of information released as a result of referrals to the Commissioner. And in fact, he quotes 0.29% as being the figure in terms of information that is released. In fact, it's less than that. It's 0.22%. Actually, we do better than he expected in the first place. I mean, compared, for example, the UK government, we are a paragon of transparency because our compliance rate was 93%. 91% in the UK government as a whole, 78% in Northern Ireland, and Secret Scotland, 74%. The compliance in Scotland. So we lead the way in terms of transparency as far as the UK is concerned.
Question 12, Keith Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Will the First Minister provide an update on the impact that the current cost of living are having on people in Wales?
Well, we know, of course, that things remain difficult for people, and of course we see today the fact that economic growth has fallen.
What concerns me, and I hear this regularly on the doorsteps these days, First Minister, and I'm sure that you would agree, that the impact of 5 years of Tory government has had a detrimental impact on our workforce. 5 million people on very low wages, 1.3 million in part-time employment, and 1.8 million on zero-hour contracts.
Well, we know that the situation is very difficult for many people, but what really concerns me is what was stated today, that the growth in the economy has been on the basis of retail and on the basis of people eating out. There's no growth on manufacturing, and there is no growth on people's earnings. So we know that the foundation, that the whole basis of this is very thin indeed.
Well, of course, the UK government has cancelled the increase in fuel tax that was proposed by the previous Labour government to assist with the cost of living. However, you may be aware of the new Dŵr Cymru tariff, which will assist people on an income of less than £12,500. Now, of course, the tariff will assist families on the lowest income with their living costs by actually reducing their water bill. So what additional support can you, as government, provide to schemes such as this in order to reduce the cost of living?
Well, of course, we work very closely with Welsh Water, and we welcome very much what they have done. We know, yet again, that people still feel that they don't have enough money in their pockets, and we know that there is a gap which is now greater than the deficit stood in 2010, and we know that any economic growth is very fragile, and so we know now that now is the time for a change in the UK government.
Question 13, Jonathan Saunders.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Will the First Minister make a statement on mental health support in North Wales?
Yes, we expect, of course, provision to be made in line with Together for Mental Health, and we continue to offer the LHB support to improve its mental health services as part of our escalation arrangements.
Thank you, First Minister. In 2013, Towel Van Dementia Ward at Ysbyty Glan Clwyd was closed, patients transferred and some staff suspended due to fears of the quality and safety of patient care. However, it's now been more than a year since the police were called in to investigate, and North Wales, the people of North Wales are none the wiser as to any outcome. Would the First Minister provide an update on the progress of this investigation, its estimated date for completion, and also what are the outcomes and what lessons have been learned, if any?
Well, in terms of Towel Van, the unit, of course, is no longer operational. There is a report that hasn't been published, but that's at the request of the police, because there's a police investigation. So I'm unable to give the member any further information with regard to that. It's a matter for the police to provide information about. And of course, given the fact there is a police investigation, it's not possible for me to comment further at this time.
Question 14, Andrew Archie-Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What steps have been taken by the Welsh Government to improve economic performance in South Wales Central?
Well, a range of priorities, supporting jobs and growth and improving the business environment, and of course the provision of business support through Business Wales, ICT support, and of course transport infrastructure improvements.
Thank you, First Minister. Obviously, for many businesses, if they're seeking planning permissions, for example, or environmental constraints or covenants to improve their business performance, they have an interface with Natural Resources Wales. Today in the press, after a survey of Natural Resources Wales staff, only 14% of those staff have confidence in the organisation's ability to work properly. Obviously, the government is the sponsoring body. You put the money into it, and it is vital that that organisation has the confidence of its staff to help economic activity in South Wales Central. How do you read the results from the survey of staff that only has 14% of the staff confident in the direction of travel of that organisation?
Well, I mean, it was 40. It's not a high figure, I grant him, but it was 14% in terms of the merger itself, not in terms of the future direction. It was always going to be difficult to bring three quangos together. And I do pay tribute to those involved in doing that. Nevertheless, it is important that business continues to have faith in Natural Resources Wales. I know that officials have written to the Chief Executive in order to seek assurances following the publication of the survey. I'm not aware of businesses generally finding that NRW is unresponsive in terms of dealing with planning applications. But it is important, of course, to make sure that what has been a difficult birth, that much is true, that the good progress that's been made since is continued.
And finally, Peter Black.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the Welsh Government's policy on open cast mining?
Yes, Minerals Planning Policy Wales and the Minerals Technical Advice Note 2 provide a comprehensive planning policy framework for determining planning applications for open cast coal extraction.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. The Environment Minister made a statement last week in terms of he would be asking the UK government to help contribute towards the cost of reinstating open cast because of their policy, which under previous governments, which effectively led to not enough money being put aside for that purpose. Can I ask you how the Welsh government will be taking this forward and what sort of timescale we'll be talking about in terms of making those representations, obviously after May the 7th next week?
Well, there is a difficulty that exists in Wales, and indeed, I think more so in Scotland, and that is the issue of legacy open cast mining. When British coal was privatised, the government of the day decided that it would not insist that enough money was put to one side in a bond in order to restore sites. And there are two particular sites, one of which is partially in my own constituency, one of which sits further west. And we know that there are substantial restoration costs surrounding those two sites, and no indication has been given by the operators as to how those costs might be met in the future. Nevertheless, there is a liability there. We do take the view that it's not for the Welsh taxpayer to pick up a bill for a mistake that was made by the UK government in the early 1990s. And so to us, it's important that in terms of natural justice, that the mistakes that were made then are rectified through money being made available for restoration should it be needed for these two sites and other sites in the future.
Thank you, First Minister. We now move to item 2, which is a business statement, and I call on the business.